Hello everyone, and welcome. Life moves fast, and most days feel full from beginning to end. That is one of the reasons I created this channel, to share a quiet moment, step away from the noise for a little while, and get lost in a story together. Thank you for being here. It truly means a lot to have you visit my channel. If this story speaks to you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you have any feedback on the voice narration, please share that too, because your opinion really helps me make these stories better. Now let's leave the outside world behind for a little while and begin the story. Dr. Althea Voss worked in the receiving corridor of Persis Reach Civilian Trauma Station, and on most shifts the first hour began with numbers that decided how much longer strangers would hurt. The station floated beyond the formal border of Earth jurisdiction, in a cold trade lane between three rival blocks. On paper the trauma ward belonged to Earth. In practice it belonged to emergency necessity. Freighters arrived from broken shipping routes, patrol craft came in with cracked hull plates and half-conscious crews, and refugee barges drifted through with children asleep from exhaustion and adults who had learned to stay quiet when uniforms walked past. Althea stood beneath a wall display showing analgesic reserves by color and volume. She was the chief physician for the station, which meant she was supposed to think about medicine first and politics second. Lately that order had started to reverse. An orange warning ring pulsed around the bin for multi-species nerve dampers. Another warning flashed beside the slow-release packs used for chest trauma and crush injuries. She checked the report once, then again, as if a second look might make the shortage smaller. It did not. "That is the third time you have checked the same stock line," said Inspector Rohr. His voice had the polished calm of someone who likes sounding reasonable while making other people feel watched. He stood 2 steps behind her in a dark field uniform marked with the seal of the Varex Security Coalition. He had arrived the day before with temporary oversight authority, a legal courtesy. Pulled from a security language Earth had never signed but could not fully avoid in mixed border zones. Althea did not turn at once. "That is because the same stock line is still too low. The incoming transfer manifest lists combatants and detainees. It lists patients," she said. Rohr let the silence sit between them, as though silence itself were a form of pressure. Althea closed the inventory display and faced him. She was taller than most people expected from a doctor who spent more time reading scans than lifting cargo, and she had learned long ago that posture mattered in rooms where a woman was expected to soften her own certainty. Her dark hair was tied back with a plain band, and the sleeves of her station coat were rolled once at the wrist. She looked exactly like what she was: tired, disciplined, and still fully in charge of the ward she had not slept enough to leave. Rohr gave her a small smile that never reached his eyes. "What I am trying to stop, Dr. Voss, is the erosion of post-conflict order." Althea already knew how the next 2 hours would feel. There would be noise, bad readings, too little time, and too many arguments from people who had never tried to keep a frightened being alive while asking whether they still had any relatives left. "What you call order," she said, "I call a waiting room full of people trying not to scream." Rohr ignored that. "The coalition is not questioning your right to treat injuries. We are questioning indiscriminate analgesia. Distress state is part of classification. There it is. It is not a secret." "No," Althea said. "Just a disgrace dressed as procedure." He studied her for a moment, perhaps deciding whether to press harder before the convoy arrived. Then the station tone sounded overhead and a flat voice announced an emergency inbound at Dock Ring 6, along with pressure variance and trauma intake activation. The argument ended there. On Persis Reach, alarms always outrank theory. Althea was already moving. She walked fast through the receiving doors and into the main triage corridor. Med carts were locking into place, diagnostic arms unfolded from ceiling tracks, 2 human nurses and 1 Brin. Surgical technician checked airway kits, and a translator node blinked awake in the center of the room. The station always looked almost peaceful in the minute before panic arrived. White lights. Clean floor. Ordered instruments. Then the doors opened, and order had to prove it deserved the name. "Status," Althea said. Nurse Marichan looked up from a skin board. 3 vessels linked to the convoy. 1 refugee shuttle, 1 coalition escort, and 1 salvage tug carrying survivors from the interdicted freighter. 31 confirmed living on manifest. 5 unstable. Atmosphere contamination unresolved. Isolation net? Ready. Secondary pain line? Short of 2 full racks. Althea absorbed that without letting it show. Then we scale, But we do not split by batch, chain of command, or species. Need-based dosing only. Inspector Rohr had followed her into the bay. He spoke loudly enough for the room to hear, which told everyone exactly what he wanted the room to remember. You are issuing that order before classification. Althea did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Years in emergency medicine had taught her that true authority was often quieter than panic. I am issuing that order because pain kills judgment, collapses breathing, drives shock, and destroys coherent testimony. Anyone in my ward gets treated as a patient first. Rohr stepped closer. Detainees under coalition review cannot receive equal sedation windows until identity risk is resolved. Then resolve identity risk faster. This is precisely the kind of civilian sentiment that destabilizes border response. Althea turned to the room instead of to him. The staff needed direction more than they needed theater. Listen carefully. We have incoming casualties from multiple vessels. Some may be armed. Some may be detained. Some may have been crew. Some may have been cargo labor. None of that changes the first problem in the next 5 minutes. The first problem is who can breathe, who is bleeding internally, and who is going into neurogenic collapse. We treat that first. The staff moved again. It was not defiance exactly. It was relief, the kind that came when someone finally said the obvious thing out loud. Dock Ring 6 opened with a shudder that carried through the floor. The first gurney came in under emergency clamps, pushed by 2 medics from the refugee shuttle. The patient on it was a narrow-shouldered Keeler male with silver-gray skin dulled by dehydration and a chest plate cracked by blunt impact. Behind him came a human cargo pilot with a burned arm and shrapnel in her side, then a Varric trooper with a mangled lower leg, then a child wrapped in thermal foil, and then 2 detainees bound at the wrist anchors to prevent flight in transit. Althea moved from bed to bed with Chen at her shoulder. Keeler chest trauma. Open line. 40% relief to start, then reassess. Detainee 2, possible spinal insult. Stabilize the neck. I said stabilize, not restrain harder. Pilot in Bay 3 gets local repair and a respiratory scan. She stays conscious if she can. The child gets fluids and quiet first. No questions yet. At the 6th bed she stopped. A lean man in a torn transit suit lay strapped to the frame with his eyes half open, lips dry, and one side of his head matted with blood. The suit emblem showed he had served on the interdicted freighter as a signal engineer, not a combat officer. His chart tag identified him as Ilyasin, contract technician, independent registry pending review. The readings at his neck and temple showed blunt trauma, oxygen debt, and pain severe enough to throw his pulse into dangerous spikes. Who delayed him? Althea asked. A coalition orderly did not answer. Rohr did. He was awaiting classification. Althea looked at the timer on the bed rail. 7 minutes since intake seal. 7 minutes of avoidable pain in a patient with obvious cranial injury. Her jaw tightened. Override that hold. He may be a high-value witness or conspirator. He may be dead in 3 minutes. Override it. Rohr did not move. Althea reached across him, entered her physician code into the rail, and released the block herself. Chen handed her an injector. Althea set the dose lower than she would in a quieter hospital and higher than any coalition protocol would have allowed before classification. It was enough relief to let Ilya breathe without drowning in his own body, and not so much that it buried him under sedation. When the line entered, his face lost the twisted look of effort that had held it for too long. It was not peace. It was room to think. His eyes opened wider. He tried to speak. Easy, Althea said. You are at Perseus Reach. Earth Station. I am Doctor Althea Voss. You are injured, but you are still here. Breathe first. He looked at her coat, then at the earth patch below the shoulder seam. They said, he whispered. The Earth Clinic gives everyone the same. Althea kept one hand on the bed rail. We give what the injury requires. He made a sound that might have been a laugh if pain had not been sitting inside it. That is not the same thing out here. It was the first clear sentence he gave her. At the time it sounded like one more strange line from a concussed man in severe pain. Later, it would become one of the lines that changed everything. For now the room kept moving. The Varric trooper with the crushed leg bit through a restraint and cursed at anyone within reach until a Bryn nurse got proper relief into his line. One detainee turned out to be a dockhand who had grabbed a weapon after pirates boarded his vessel and had been labeled hostile because nobody had revised the manifest. The child was not a child at all, but a very small adult from a low-gravity colony. The refugee shuttle carried 3 people who had never been on the interdicted freighter but had been swept into the evacuation corridor when a docking arm failed. Every few minutes Roar objected to a dose, a sequence, or a question asked too early or too late. Every few minutes Althea either ignored him or overruled him. By the end of the first hour the ward had stabilized enough to produce a second problem, which in border medicine was often more dangerous than the first. Once nobody was dying in the next 30 seconds, people had time to decide what story they wanted the injuries to tell. That evening, after the corridor had been scrubbed and the last unstable patient moved to monitored recovery, Althea reviewed intake notes, with the station recorder running. On Perseus Reach, accurate records were not only good medicine, they were defense. Chen stood beside the wall terminal with a cup of burnt station coffee she had no time to drink. Message traffic is spiking, she said. Coalition channels are framing it as a procedural challenge. To what? To order. To custody. To battlefield accountability. Pick one. They are testing language. Althea leaned back in the chair and pressed her fingers against the bridge of her nose. The room was small and plain, with a metal counter, a portable scanner dock, a cabinet of wound sealants, and no window. It had become her office because the actual office had better uses during surge days. How many direct objections did Roar file? 9 before local dusk. Only 9? Chen almost smiled. Give him time. The recorder light blinked red. Althea opened the first audio snippet from bed 6. Ilyas Sen's words came through thin and uneven. He had said that the Earth Clinic gave everyone the same, and then added that out here, that was not the same thing. Althea saved the clip under protected medical context. That line again, Chen said softly. Yes. You think it matters? I think people say revealing things when somebody finally lets them hurt less. Chen looked toward the closed door. You also think someone is going to try to take these files? Yes. Should we encrypt off station? Althea thought for 2 seconds. Not yet. If we move them now, it looks like concealment. Duplicate locally under medical lock, then keep chain of custody clean. Chen hesitated. You think this is going above station level? Althea let out a tired breath that did not qualify as a laugh. I think it already has. She was right. By the time she stepped into the corridor again, 3 requests were waiting in her queue. One was from the Varric Security Coalition asking for full dosage records by species and status category. One was from the Border Health Arbitration Office asking why a civilian station had deviated from mixed zone stabilization guidance. One was from Earth Consular Health asking for a factual summary before the story stopped belonging to facts. The last message was the shortest. It told her to hold the line if she could, because they might need to defend principle, not just procedure. Althea read it twice. Outside Recovery Bay 2, Ilyas Sen was awake long enough to ask for water and then fail at lifting the cup himself. Althea held it while he drank. He blinked at the ceiling once, slowly, as if testing whether pain still owned the whole room. You are stable for now, she told him. He swallowed. For now is expensive where I came from. Where did you come from? A relay platform. Then a contractor barge. Then a freighter that did not want witnesses alive. His speech faltered, but not because the medication had clouded him. It had done the opposite. It had made coherent thought possible. Do you remember the interdiction? She asked. He kept his eyes shut. I remember the categories. What categories? Who got relief? Who got half? Who got none? Who could still answer questions? Althea felt the room sharpen around those words. He opened his eyes again and looked at her with the bleakness of someone who did not expect being believed to improve his life. You do not understand, he said. I am not telling you they were cruel. Cruel is simple. They had a chart. The sentence settled inside her and stayed there. A chart? She asked. Not now. All right. They call it triage optimization. His breathing changed. Fatigue was dragging him down. Then rest, Althea said. We can talk later. He caught the cuff of her sleeve with weak fingers. If they ask whether you changed us, say no. Say you made us audible. That was the last full thing he said before sleep took him. More than the phrase itself, what stayed with Althea was what it implied. Someone, somewhere, had grown used to deciding who was allowed to hurt clearly, and who was supposed to hurt quietly. In the station's night cycle, the first public statement from the coalition appeared across 3 regional feeds. It was careful, concise, and plainly designed by people who understood the power of first framing. The statement said the Earth-operated clinic was under review after improper equalization of pain management in a mixed custody casualty event, and it added that security concerns had been raised regarding detainee handling and classification integrity. There were no lies large enough to be dramatic. It was only language bent precisely enough to move blame into place. By second shift, commentators were already arguing over whether Earth medicine was too sentimental for contested space. By third shift, someone had clipped Althea's override from the intake logs and distributed it without context. By fourth shift, the phrase, "giving everyone the same," had become a slogan against her. Althea went back to work anyway. That was the part outsiders never seemed to understand. Scandal did not pause the injured. Politics did not lower fever. Public narrative did not stop wound rot, head swelling, or panic in a frightened survivor who woke in a room full of unknown lights. For 2 more days she ran the station. She slept in stretches shorter than a full dream. She signed transfer sheets, revised dosages where supply demanded compromise, answered consular health, and ignored 3 interview requests. She fought roar over access to bedside questioning. She insisted that no one in an active pain crisis would be treated as a witness before being treated as a patient. Each small decision strengthened her medically, and weakened her politically. That was how systems often worked. They punished good choices by making them expensive. On the 3rd day, a woman from the Bryn agricultural colonies arrived with rib fractures and chemical burns from the interdicted freighter's service deck. She had been unconscious at intake and barely responsive afterward. Under controlled relief she gave a clipped account that aligned almost exactly with Ilya's fragments. The cargo lane was the same. The detention cells were the same. The differences in medication by species and labor category were the same. Even the phrase was the same. When someone had asked why a Varec contractor received full dampers while a bonded loader got half-dose patches, the answer had been resource priority. On the 4th day, the wounded coalition trooper with the crushed leg admitted, after much pride and cursing, that his own relief field had been set higher because line personnel were classified as order-preserving assets. He seemed ashamed only when he realized Althea was not surprised. On the 5th day, a civilian mechanic from a minor moon colony began crying in recovery because she thought the station would reduce her dosage after formal questioning. When Althea told her that would not happen, the woman stared as if she had misheard the grammar itself. "What do you mean it will not happen?" she asked. "I mean your pain is not a reward for cooperation." The woman turned her face away and whispered, "That is not how mixed custody works." By then Althea had stopped thinking in isolated testimonies. A pattern had formed. It was not yet proof broad enough to survive a tribunal, but it was more than rumor. The same structure was appearing in statements from patients who had never met each other, belonged to different species, and had nothing to gain from giving Earth a flattering moral story. Pain control was being tiered by social and strategic worth. The medicine bothered her. The ethics disgusted her. The politics scared her, because she knew what it meant if the pattern were real. It meant the argument against her station was not about overreach on a bad day. It meant someone was trying to protect a larger rule that no one wanted examined in daylight. She called a closed meeting in the supply office with Chun, the Bryn surgical technician Esho, and station administrator Pavel arrived looking as though bureaucracy had bitten him personally. He was a careful man who believed systems could be persuaded to remain humane if handled with proper documentation and no sudden gestures. Persis Reach had eroded that belief without fully destroying it. "I assume this is urgent," he said. Althea set 4 anonymized statements on the table. "Read the dosing lines," he read. His face changed slowly. Esho, who had 3 hands and the most precise wound closure technique on the station, clicked his mandibles once in disgust. "Same pattern across physiology classes." Chin pointed to 2 skin stills. "See where the requested medication caps differ before arrival. The injury types are functionally comparable." Pavel lowered the pages. "You are suggesting systematic differential." Relief. "I am telling you we are seeing it," Althea said. "Not once. Repeatedly." He looked toward the sealed door. "If we put that in a formal accusation without full chain evidence, they will bury us." If we do not, they will bury the people who came through here. Pavel rubbed his forehead. Earth can defend a procedural disagreement. Earth cannot casually accuse 3 blocks of structured abuse. Then perhaps Earth should stop enjoying the word procedural. He did not answer. After a long silence, he asked what she needed. A secure duplicate of all intake records from the Conva incident. Full audio. Dosage overrides. Chain notations. And I need you to deny early transfer requests on any patient still medically unstable. Pavel looked at the table again. They will claim you are preserving witness contamination. They are already claiming that. He let out a helpless breath. Yes. They are. Pavel agreed, reluctantly and nervously. Then Helion compliance entered the story. The first sign was a compact formal notice routed through Border Health Arbitration. Helion identified itself as a regulatory advisory group retained by multiple security and transport interests to assess stability protocols in contested space. It requested review access to analgesic variance data from Perseus Reach, citing concerns that equalized relief could compromise custody hierarchy, memory reliability, and post-incident accountability. Althea read the notice and understood at once that Helion was worse than Roar. Roar was military and visible. Helion was what happened when a cruel idea hired lawyers and started calling itself infrastructure. That evening Consular Health sent another message. It warned that security coalition pressure was now linked with private regulatory advocacy, told her to keep records exact, avoid public statements, and prepare for escalation. The next day a commentator on a trade law channel described Earth medicine as morally theatrical and operationally naive. By the next cycle, Helion representatives were on 3 feeds explaining that differentiated pain management was not punishment but a calibrated resource model that protected limited infrastructure during mass casualty handling. Althea turned the channel off halfway through the sentence. She could not decide which part offended her more, the lie, or the smoothness with which it had been made to sound inevitable. In Recovery Bay 2, Ilyason had stabilized enough to sit up for short intervals. His headaches remained brutal, light hurt him, and memory came in broken stretches. But when Althea asked whether he had worked near network control on the freighter, he gave her an answer that changed the shape of the case. I service relay permissions, he said. For cargo? For routing, custody, welfare flags. Anything the carrier wanted logged or hidden. Did you see the chart you mentioned? Not directly. I saw a reference table feeding into med allocation software. What did it classify? He closed his eyes. Species clusters. Contract value. Combat relevance. Detention priority. Litigation risk. Cooperative likelihood. Althea stood still. Pain thresholds? She asked. No. Permission ceilings. He swallowed hard. How much relief was allowed before a body stopped being useful to the system that owned the body? The sentence landed like metal. For one brief dishonest second, Althea felt the temptation to stop asking, not because she wanted ignorance, but because naming a thing sometimes made it real enough that you had to fight it, or live with yourself for not fighting it. She kept going. Could you prove this existed? Maybe. If the freight core survived. If the mirrored logs on the escort were not cleaned. If someone higher up signed the update package. He opened his eyes again. You are not hearing me, Doctor. That program was not built on one ship. It was standardized. Do you know the designation? He frowned, chasing memory. Palliative allocation matrix. No. Modified palliative allocation matrix. He breathed in slowly, winced, and whispered. They called it MPAM on a maintenance line. That was the first concrete label. Not enough to win, but enough to anchor the truth. Althea recorded it and locked the note. When she left the room, Inspector Rohr was waiting in the corridor. You spent 15 minutes alone with a classified detainee-adjacent witness, he said. He is a patient. He is a participant in a security incident. He is concussed and barely upright. Rohr's eyes settled on her face. You are becoming central to a conflict your station is not equipped to survive. My station survives conflict every day. That is the job description. I am offering you a narrower path. Release your records to external review. Accept that your dosing protocols require correction. Limit this to a local compliance matter. You may even keep your post. There it was. The first real bargain. Althea understood at once that he had not come to threaten her. He had come to make surrender sound professional. And if I do not? She asked. Roar looked down the corridor toward the recovery bays, where the low hum of life support and circulation pumps never quite stopped. Then it becomes a question bigger than medicine, he said. And in questions bigger than medicine, Dr. Voss, the people who heal are rarely the ones allowed to define reality. He walked away before she answered. Then she went back into the ward and signed another pain adjustment for a refugee with abdominal tears. That was how these days worked now. Every medical choice was still medical, but each one also carried the weight of a larger argument closing in around the station. A week after the convoy incident, Perseus Reach received a formal inquiry notice from the Border Health Arbitration Office. It was not a summons yet, but the wording made the next step plain. Dr. Althea Voss was to provide a preliminary explanation for unauthorized equalization of controlled analgesic access in a mixed custody event involving coalition personnel, detainees, civilian labor, and undocumented transit individuals. Unauthorized equalization. She read aloud. Chen stared at the wall as though it had developed a personal insult. We should print that and frame it. Future historians should know exactly how rotten their vocabulary was. Althea almost smiled. Prepare every dose decision with injury justification. No exceptions. I want our notes cleaner than theirs. Done. And move all witness-relevant conversations under medical context and language support if needed. Already started. And no one speaks to Helion without me. Pavel appeared at the doorway carrying a tablet he did not want to be carrying. They requested transfer of 3 patients, he said. Which 3? Ilya Senator the Brin loader from service deck. And the low-gravity civilian mechanic. Of course. The 3 whose accounts align most dangerously. On what grounds? Althea asked. Pavel glanced at the tablet. Facility specialization. Shin made a harsh sound. That is a joke. It is a legal joke, Pavel said. Those are the expensive kind. Althea took the tablet and skimmed the request. No. 2 are still medically unstable for transfer, and the 3rd requires continuing neuro-observation. Denied. Pavel hesitated. They may override. Then they can do it above my signature, not through it. He nodded once. 9 hours later the override came. Ilyasin was designated appropriate for secure neurological relocation to a Varec-affiliated observation unit with superior cranial trauma monitoring. The language was immaculate. Whoever wrote it understood that outright seizure would look ugly, so they wrapped it in concern. Althea tried to block it through clinical necessity. She argued residual instability, memory fragmentation, delayed bleed risk, and continuity of care. She argued every honest thing she had. The transfer went forward anyway. Ilya left at shift change, pale and exhausted, with 2 security escorts and 1 contracted neuromedic who never met Althea's eyes. Before the gurney cleared the corridor, Ilya gripped the rail and whispered, "Do not let them make this about mercy. It was about sorting value." Then he was gone. He died 14 hours later in transit. The official cause listed unexpected vascular failure secondary to prior head trauma. The unofficial effect was immediate. Coalition feeds implied that Perseus Reach's dosing choices had complicated his neurological course. Helion advocates spoke of the tragic consequences of emotionally driven emergency medicine. A legal analyst on a neutral world channel asked whether Earth clinics had begun mistaking equality for competence. Althea watched that last panel in the station break room with the sound muted. Then she turned off the display and went to the morgue ledger. Naming the dead correctly was one of the rituals she still believed in. She checked Ilya Sen's intake identification, transfer time, and final status with the same attention she would have given a head of state. Contract technician. Signal engineer. Human. Survived interdiction. Died after forced relocation. No relatives yet notified. Then she did the thing she had been trying not to do. She opened a private channel to Earth Consular Health and sent a protected message with 1 line in the body. She wrote that this was no longer a procedural dispute, and that she believed they were seeing structured pain stratification across mixed border operations. The reply did not come for 6 hours. When it did, it was short. They understood, she was told. Preserve what she could, do not assume local resolution, and prepare for further action. That night Althea did not sleep at all. Instead she went through every surviving file from the convoy incident, and built a map no politician had asked for, and no patient would ever know existed. She tracked species, injury type, status label at intake, requested analgesia before arrival, actual analgesia after Earth intervention, emotional state after relief, and testimony coherence after relief. She looked for exceptions. There were a few. Not enough to break the pattern. Those marked high strategic relevance got fuller relief faster. Those marked labor, undocumented, detainee, or low-value civilian were expected to tolerate more. The cruelty was systematic, but what made it durable was not cruelty alone. It was administration. Around dawn, Esho entered the records room and read her comparison set in silence. "This is older than the convoy," he said. "Yes. They will not merely defend a decision. They will defend a culture." Then he sat beside her and said, "Among my people, institutions do not fear accusations. They fear comparisons. If you show the same wound managed differently according to status, they become afraid." That stayed with her. By midday, something even worse happened. A partial internal summary of Persis Reach records leaked onto public channels. Not the real records, only a summary, selected, trimmed, and stripped of context. It showed only that Earth clinicians had increased relief windows for detainees and undocumented casualties beyond coalition recommendations. It included no injury tables, no instability notes, and no pre-existing request disparities. It was just enough to make it look as though Althea's station had washed away distinctions the border blocks considered necessary. Pavel came into her office white-faced and tight-jawed. "I did not authorize this," he said immediately. "I know." He looked at the terminal, then at her. "Someone with internal access exported a compliance packet last night." Chin arrived half a second later and swore under her breath. "Who?" Pavel hesitated too long. Althea knew then. "Tell me." He did not meet her eyes. "Lisa Wren. Records Administration." Althea pictured Lisa at once. Quiet. Efficient. Kind to frightened families. Unremarkable in the way competent staff often were, until systems squeezed them hard enough to reveal what they feared most. "Why?" Althea asked. Pavel answered softly. "She thought if arbitration saw cooperation, they would spare the station. She thought one doctor could be sacrificed more easily than an entire facility." Chin turned away in disbelief. Althea stayed still. That hurt more than the leak itself. Lisa had not hated her. She had believed the only way to save the clinic was to feed it a body smaller than the whole. "What exactly did she send?" Althea asked. "Summaries. Not the locked source files. But enough. Enough to frame intent." "Yes." Althea rose from the chair and went to the narrow window strip in the office door, where the corridor outside looked calm and ordinary. A patient transport drifted past, and two orderlies argued quietly over skin priority. Life continued with the obscene normalcy it always kept when somebody's career, reputation, or country was beginning to burn. "Do not remove her yet," Althea said. Chin stared. "What? Do not remove her yet. She sold you. She sold safety as she understood it." Chen's voice sharpened. "And if that destroys the rest of us? It might." Althea turned back. "But if I start making this about internal traitors, I do their work for them." Pavel looked stricken. "Althea. No. Listen to me. We lock the remaining originals. We document the leak. We do not retaliate in panic. That is what they want. They want the station to look unstable, partisan, and self-contradictory." She paused, then added, "But Lisa does not touch a terminal unsupervised again." Pavel nodded. By the end of the second week, the story had fully escaped local control. Commentators were asking whether Earth medicine was incompatible with mixed jurisdiction security. Coalition spokespeople claimed Earth was imposing sentiment on a dangerous frontier. Helion wanted a galaxy-wide review of civilian medical independence. That was when the Galaxy Council noticed. A formal notification from the Council Chamber of Intercivilizational Standards followed. Doctor Althea Voss was ordered to appear in person before a public hearing concerning emergency medical equalization, custody interference, and cross-jurisdictional stability doctrine. Earth could have sent Council alone. It could have sent a diplomat, an envoy, or a legal shield. It did not. Because this time the person at the center of the event was the evidence no substitute could match. She had made the decisions, heard the first words, watched the pattern emerge, and lost the witness. She would have to carry the case herself. When the summons arrived, the clinic fell strangely quiet. Not because work stopped. Work never stopped. It was because everyone understood that the argument had just changed scale. Until that moment, Persis Reach had been fighting to keep a station alive and a doctor from being buried under paperwork. Now the question was larger. Could a human doctor stand in front of the Galaxy Council and say that the border order many species called necessary was built on graded suffering? Could Earth afford to let her say it? Consular Health answered the next morning in a secure call. The screen showed Deputy Undersecretary Lena Marr from Earth Medical External Affairs, a woman with silver at her temples and the expression of someone who had learned to conserve outrage because history kept demanding it too often. Dr. Voss, she said, you will not be replaced. Althea sat alone in the records room for the call. That is either confidence or cruelty. Both, perhaps. But it is also strategy. If we send a diplomat, this becomes abstract. If we send you, they have to look at the person who made the choice. They will say I contaminated the issue. They already are. Althea leaned back. What is Earth prepared to defend? Me? A procedure? A moral statement? Marr did not answer immediately. That told Althea the truth before the words came. We are prepared to defend your authority as a physician. We are prepared to defend medical independence under triage conditions. We are prepared to question differentiated analgesia in mixed custody. But, Marr's face hardened. But if you intend to allege a standardized class system of suffering across multiple blocks, you must be precise. Not passionate. Precise. Althea thought of Ilya saying they had a chart. I can be precise. Good. Because they will not try to beat you by sounding cruel. They will try to beat you by sounding administrative. When the call ended, Althea made herself a working list. The original files were still secure. The leak summary was documented. The transfer timeline was reconstructed. Ilya's final recorded words were cross-linked. The Bryn loader statement was verified. The trooper dosage discrepancy was logged. The mechanical comparison tables were still incomplete. She needed an independent witness if possible, and she needed a legal frame that would make pain stratification visible to non-medical minds. It was a doctor's list, not a hero's list. Before departure, she walked the station once more and found Lisa Wren waiting near Base 6. I know you know, Lisa said. Yes. Lisa confessed that she had thought one doctor's sacrifice might spare the station. Althea told her the system had wanted a narrative, not a concession. I was afraid, Lisa whispered. That is how these systems like us, Althea said. When they ask what happened here, tell the truth even if it costs you comfort. Lisa nodded, and 2 cycles later Althea boarded in. Earth diplomatic transport bound for the Council sphere. Persis Reach shrank behind her into a glittering medical node suspended in black. Ahead lay the chamber where large powers washed ugly decisions in formal language and called the result civilization. She brought no theatrics with her. Only records, memory, and the growing certainty that what had happened at her clinic was not an error at the edges of order. It was order. And that was why it had to be seen clearly. The transport to the Council sphere was quiet in the worst possible way, the kind of diplomatic quiet built from padded tension rather than peace. Althea occupied a compact briefing suite with 1 desk, 1 sleeping berth, and a wall terminal that kept filling faster than she could read. Earth legal staff had loaded her with precedent summaries, chamber protocol, hostile question forecasts, and memos about what not to say if she wanted to avoid making 5 separate blocks angrier than they already were. Instead she opened the row of records again. Ilya's audio. The Bryn loader statement. The scan comparisons. The request caps. The transfer authorization. The leak notice. Helian's filings. She listened for cadence as much as content, because by now she understood the hearing would not turn on facts alone. It would turn on who could make the facts sound most natural. After an hour, Earth Council Samir Vale entered without ceremony, carrying a second tablet and the expression of a man already annoyed by everyone in power. He was not handsome in the polished way council representatives often were. He was useful-looking. Mid-40s. Lean. Dark suit cut for motion rather than display. A lawyer who knew how to stand in bad weather. You ignored the protocol packet, he said. I prioritized the patient file. Good. He took the chair opposite her and slid his tablet across the desk. I am not here to stop you from saying what you know. I am here to keep them from shrinking it. Althea glanced at the document he had opened. It was not law. It was a map of likely attack patterns. They would question her emotional overreach. They would question memory reliability under pain management. They would question Earth bias, chain gaps caused by the station leak, whether unequal pain management was merely triage variance, and whether one doctor's moral doctrine was being used to embarrass frontier security. They are predictable, she said. They are disciplined. That is worse. Samir folded his hands. Listen carefully. You do not win by sounding more human than they are. You win by making their framework sound less civilized than they need it to sound. Althea let that settle. Do they intend this as a truth hearing? She asked. No. A liability hearing? Closer. A legitimacy hearing. For me? For an entire way of treating pain. He tapped the map. The coalition wants the chamber to ratify the idea that status can influence relief access in contested environments. Helion wants that ratification dressed as administrative necessity so their clients can keep using it without calling it cruelty. And Earth? Samir gave a tired half-smile. Earth wants not to lose. She appreciated the honesty. Samir then told her they might have a live witness, a Keeler transport officer named Joran Tal. He had historically been hostile to Earth, but he had seen a relief allocation screen tied to strategic class during transfer staging. He could not authenticate the software, but he could authenticate the practice. That might be enough to force hesitation. 3 hours later the council sphere came into view, a vast engineered ring of habitation arcs, law chambers, diplomatic habitats, and commercial strata wrapped around a dim blue star. Samir joined her at the view strip as docking beacons aligned. You have appeared before chambers before? He asked. Medical review boards. Regional disaster panels. Never this. The room is designed to make you feel small. I am not going there to feel large. He glanced at her. Good answer. When the transport sealed into the diplomatic arm, Earth protocol staff met them with badges, route plans, and one final attempt to shape the event in language safer than truth. The senior attaché, a polished man named Orensei, walked with them through a curved corridor lined with transparent alloy and slowly moving security drones. Dr. Voss. Earth's position remains that emergency medicine must preserve baseline dignity across status groups. He said. Baseline dignity. Althea repeated. It is effective language. It is timid language. It is survivable language. She stopped walking. Samir stopped too. The attaché looked back. I am not going to accuse the chamber of enjoying pain, Althea said. I am going to say something simpler. If two bodies are hurt the same way, and you decide one should hurt more because the system values it less, that is not medicine. Oren held her gaze for a moment, then inclined his head once. Then say it in a way that keeps the undecided with you. They resumed walking. The chamber complex occupied one of the inner arcs, where gravity felt slightly heavier and even the air seemed arranged for authority. On public walls, feeds discussed the hearing as if it were a matter of technical doctrine rather than the right of an injured being not to have pain used for convenience. Althea disliked the place at once. Her assigned preparation room overlooked a lower promenade where civilians, interns, couriers, and minor aides moved between towers beneath glass canopy ribs. The sight grounded her. No matter how large the council pretended to be, it still depended on ordinary bodies walking somewhere on sore feet, carrying tasks larger than their pay grade. There, at least, the galaxy remained true. Samir set up 3 terminals in a triangle and began working with the quiet speed of someone used to thinking under deadline. We need to choose the spine, he said. Not every point. The spine. Althea sat down. The spine is simple. Pain was being distributed by value. Yes. But we need the chamber to get there by steps they cannot refuse. She thought for a moment. Start with medicine. Comparable injuries. Comparable need. Then show deviation by status. Then force them to say whether status is allowed to change pain access. Samir nodded. Good. And after that? After that, make them live with the meaning of their answer. He looked pleased in a restrained lawyerly way. That is why Earth kept you. For the next several hours they built the testimony. Structure. They would establish the station and the incident, establish medical logic, establish repeated disparities, show that objection began only when equal relief disrupted those disparities, and then use Joran Tal only after Helion had committed publicly to its logic. When a junior aide announced that Helion had added 2 expert analysts to the witness queue, Samir only said, Of course they did. Late in the cycle, Althea finally showered, changed into the simplest formal coat Earth had provided, and stood alone by the window while chamber lights rose across the inner ring. She thought of Persis' reach, the intake corridor, Ilya saying they had a chart, Lisa's apology, Chen's anger, Esho on the records room floor, and the many beings who had not been surprised when she said pain was not a reward for cooperation. By the time morning came, her goal had become narrower and clearer. She did not need the room to like her. She needed the room to understand exactly what it was being asked to excuse. Morning in the chamber district began with ceremony, but Althea's hearing did not open in the main council floor. It opened in the Chamber of Intercivilizational Standards, a broad semicircular room designed to look less theatrical while remaining theatrical enough to satisfy anyone who confused architecture with legitimacy. Tiered seats rose around a central testimony platform. Public galleries curved above them. Media nodes hovered in disciplined rows. Translation screens ran like pale water along the walls. Delegates occupied the main arc according to block and privilege, their insignia forming a quiet map of old power. Chair Severin presided from the center dais, his long face expressionless and his species' translucent cranial fronds glowing faintly with internal circulation. To his right sat Iri Ven of the Colonial Recovery Bloc, compact and sharp-eyed. To his left lounged Dha Lan of the Freight Alliances, whose reputation for moderation mostly meant he preferred profit that did not make too much noise. Roar was present, though not on the main dais. Helion had 3 seats at the advisory rail. Althea took her place at the testimony platform and felt at once what Samir had warned her about. The room was built to make any single witness look temporary and small. Chair Severin opened in the smooth, grave tone of institutional danger. He said the hearing concerned the conduct of Doctor Althea Voss of Earth, Chief Physician of Persis Reach Civilian Trauma Station, in relation to emergency medical decisions taken during a mixed custody casualty intake event and the broader implications of those decisions for intercivilizational stability doctrine. There it was. Not people. Not suffering. Stability doctrine. Althea kept her face neutral. Severin continued. Dr. Voss, you are not here as a criminal defendant. You are here as a responsible actor whose conduct may clarify the proper limits of medical equalization in contested environments. Samir, seated at the Earth advisory position below the platform, did not move. But Althea could almost hear the warning they had prepared together. They want the room to believe equal care is the radical thing requiring defense. Do you understand the nature of these proceedings? Severin asked. I understand that my medical decisions are being used to debate whether injured beings should be allowed different amounts of pain based on status. A ripple moved through the room. Severin's expression did not change. That is your characterization. It is also the question. He let the silence work, and then called for opening statements. The coalition spoke first through Advocate Merrick Soul, who wore civility like an iron surface. He said no one questioned Earth's compassion. The room had heard that phrase too many times already. He said the issue was whether compassion untethered from security context endangered lawful order. He said frontier medicine operated under realities central worlds preferred not to look at directly. He said Dr. Voss had, in a moment of ideological rigidity, overridden established distinctions meant to preserve accountability among combatants, detainees, labor contractors, and non-affiliated civilians. Then Helion spoke. Its lead analyst, Sardane, was worse than Soul because he sounded more humane. He praised trauma care, brave physicians, and baseline relief. Then he introduced the poison. In resource-constrained and legally entangled environments, he said, uniform relief thresholds could degrade investigative clarity, destabilize transfer integrity, and inadvertently privilege high-risk actors over vulnerable populations. Responsible systems, he said, adapt. When Earth was offered response, Samir kept it brief. Earth's position, he said, is that emergency medicine loses legitimacy the moment suffering becomes a calibrated instrument of governance. We are here because Dr. Voss refused to let a civilian trauma station become an administrative pain tool. Then it was Althea's turn. The chair led her through her role, the station's function, the convoy intake, her triage method, and the reason for her override decisions. She answered as a doctor, not an advocate. Persis Reach was a civilian trauma station under Earth administration serving mixed border traffic and emergency casualties. The convoy included coalition personnel, civilian labor, detainees, and undocumented transit survivors. Her triage method prioritized airway, bleeding, shock, neurological risk, and immediate pain crisis according to medical need. She overrode classification holds because several patients faced urgent deterioration, and because unmanaged pain could worsen physiological collapse and corrupt coherent communication. Corrupt coherent communication? Severin repeated. Yes, Althea said. Severe pain distorts memory, breathing, cardiovascular stability, and the ability to answer even basic questions accurately. Then the questioning began in earnest. First came Sol, whose job was to make custody sound more important than medicine. He approached slowly, as if the pace itself might make his argument sound more reasonable. Dr. Voss, he said, do you deny that contested environments require differentiated handling of persons according to security status? I do not deny that custody exists. I deny that pain control should be used to enforce it. So you believe all injured beings should be treated identically? No. I believe similar injuries should receive appropriate relief regardless of how useful a governing system finds the body that carries them. A low rustle moved through the room. Sol smiled faintly. That is a compelling line, Doctor. It is also conveniently dramatic. It is also accurate. He shifted again. Now he was trying to pin the whole case to one death. During the convoy event, did you authorize increased relief for at least 2 detainee-adjacent subjects before classification review was complete? Yes. And one of those subjects later died. After forced transfer, I opposed. Please answer only the question asked. One later died. Yes. So let that sit in the air, then pressed again. Would you agree that overintervention can have consequences? I would agree that injury, delay, transfer, and political interference all have consequences. The chair told her to confine herself to direct responses, and she did. Sol took 2 slow steps, adjusting his angle as though he were changing tools. Now he tried to force her into an extreme position that would sound reckless to the room. Is it your testimony that all status distinctions are medically irrelevant? No. It is my testimony that status distinctions are not pain receptors. That line landed cleanly. A few delegates looked up from their displays. Then Helion Sardane stood. His approach was more technical, and that made him more dangerous. He wanted the room thinking about systems, not bodies. Dr. Voss, are you familiar with the principle of adaptive stabilization under constrained resource environments? I am familiar with many phrases used to excuse avoidable suffering. A few people in the gallery reacted. The chair did not rebuke her immediately, perhaps because doing so would only highlight the exchange further. Dane remained smooth. Let us be specific. If analgesic reserves are limited, must not institutions decide how to allocate them? Yes. Then allocation is unavoidable. Allocation is unavoidable. Grading pain by social worth is not. He brought up a display full of charts, colored blocks, and resource flow models. The chamber has before it evidence that border medicine frequently requires relief sequencing by probable transfer path, threat level, compliance risk, and infrastructure burden. Are you claiming every such variable is illegitimate? Althea looked at the chart long enough to let the audience see that she was actually reading it. No, she said. I am claiming you keep using words like sequencing and burden to avoid saying that some people are expected to hurt longer because the system thinks their pain is useful. Dane moved to object. Too late. The line was already in the room. For the next hour they tried every narrowing tactic they had. One after another, they tried to make her sound uncertain, narrow, emotional, or out of scope. Was she a software expert? No. Could she personally authenticate every external record? No. Had she seen a galaxy-wide directive signed by all blocks? No. Could she prove that every deviation in pain access came from prejudice rather than operational variance? No. Was she mistaking frontier triage asymmetry for malice? No, because the asymmetry tracks status too consistently and too conveniently. Each answer mattered because she refused the temptations on both sides. She did not overclaim, and she did not retreat into modesty. She held the exact width of what she knew. That was rarer in political rooms than intelligence. After recess, Samir began Earth's guided examination. This was the part meant to slow the room down and make the structure visible again. He led her through the station logic once more, but this time with comparison tables on screen. Comparable injuries. Different recommended caps before arrival. Higher relief allowances for recognized security assets. Lower caps for detainees, labor categories, and undocumented civilians. Not every time, but enough times. Dr. Voss, he said, what happened when these patients reached Earth care? We treated by injury need. And what happened after that? They became more medically stable, more coherent, and more able to describe what had happened to them. Was that when political objection intensified? Yes. Samir nodded toward the dais. Clarify that for the chamber. Althea faced the delegates rather than Samir. Before the station changed anything, no one objected to the prior distribution of suffering. Objection began when pain relief crossed status lines. The phrasing was plain enough for any listener. That was why it worked. Samir drew the thread tighter. Why do you believe that matters? Because it means the real issue was not dosage. The real issue was that equal medical attention made certain categories of people speak with the same clarity as those already considered important. Now the chamber had to contend with a harder idea. Pain management was not only about comfort. It affected who could speak clearly enough to be heard. Severin leaned forward. Dr. Voss, are you asserting that prior systems intentionally preserved distress and lower status subjects to manage testimony and compliance? Althea answered without flourish. I am asserting that repeated outcomes strongly favored that function. It was the careful answer. Better than outrage. More dangerous than outrage. Then Samir used Ilya. Not as martyrdom. As method. He played the audio clip from intake. Ilya had said they told him the Earth Clinic gave everyone the same, and then added that out here, that was not the same thing. A second clip followed, recorded later under protected context. In it Ilya said they had a chart. The chamber remained very still. Samir did not rush. Dr. Voss, why did these words matter to you clinically? Because patients from different categories kept expressing surprise that relief was being tied to injury instead of status. And what did that surprise suggest? That unequal pain access was normal to them. Helion objected that anecdote was not proof. Samir agreed at once. Correct. Which is why Earth does not ask the chamber to rely on anecdote. He brought up the comparison set. 12 cases from multiple routes and times. Similar trauma classes. Different pre-arrival caps. Differences that track status and value labels. Dane rose again, forcing composure. Correlation is not causation. Samir nodded. Quite right. Which is why we would now like to hear from a witness who observed active relief authorization tied to strategic class. There was a visible shift at the coalition rail. Joran Tal entered from the side access under chamber escort. He was broad-shouldered even by Keeler standards, with an old fracture marking his left facial ridge. He did not look like someone eager to help Earth. He looked like someone disgusted enough to risk honesty. That alone gave him weight. After oath and identity verification, Samir asked the simplest question first. Were you present during post-incident transfer staging following the convoy intake to Persis Reach? Yes. In what role? Transport officer attached to freight escort coordination. Did you observe any system or practice linking relief permissions to subject category? Joran's answer came flat and hard. Yes. Not dramatic. Better. He described a transfer console on an escort deck showing relief windows modified by strategic tag. Security personnel received fuller authorization. Contract labor and unregistered civilians received lower ceilings unless operational value increased. Detainees were managed for interrogative viability and transport control. Dane attempted to challenge his technical expertise. Joran replied, You do not need software certification to read a screen telling med staff who is allowed to stop hurting first. That line struck the gallery harder than the dais. Sol tried another route. He was trying now to collapse everything back into the familiar excuse of hard choices. Officer Tal, is it not true that frontier conditions require difficult prioritization? Joran turned toward him with something like contempt. I have hauled wounded crews for 19 years. Prioritization is deciding who gets the first operating slot. This was deciding whose pain counted as a cost and whose counted as a tool. There it was. Not from Earth. Not from a physician. From a transport officer with no reason to flatter humanity. The air in the chamber changed. Helion understood it first. You could see it in how quickly Dane moved to repair the conceptual ground. No one here advocates suffering as a tool, he said. But now he had to say it. And once he denied it directly, Althea and Samir could force the shape of what he actually believed. Samir asked permission for a final comparison question. It was granted. Analyst Dane, does Helion compliance support differential relief thresholds based in part on status, strategic relevance, and transfer integrity? Dane chose his words like glass. Helion supports adaptive analgesic frameworks responsive to operational necessity. Samir did not look at him. He looked at the chair. Dr. Voss, in plain clinical language, what does that mean for a patient? Chair Severin hesitated only a fraction too long before allowing the question. Althea answered at once. It means two people can be hurt the same way, and the system decides one should hurt more because it values that person less, or needs that pain to keep them manageable. Then came the moment Helion could not avoid. Dane, perhaps sensing the center slipping, chose candor wrapped in abstraction. He said Dr. Voss continued to frame necessity as moral failure, and that civilizations with finite capacity had to distinguish between relief as care and relief as a destabilizing variable. Universal parity, he said, was not always compatible with order. That was the closest he had yet come to truth. It was also the sentence that doomed them in the room. Not because everyone became noble at once. Because he had finally stated the hierarchy too cleanly. Althea did not wait for Samir. She addressed the dais directly. Then let the record reflect what kind of order we are discussing. Chair Severin said nothing. So she continued. We are discussing an order in which some beings are expected to remain in greater pain because their suffering serves administration. We are discussing an order that calls this stability. We are discussing an order that became angry only when an Earth clinic interrupted it. The chamber did not erupt. Real power rooms rarely did. They chilled. That was better. IRI then spoke for the first time in nearly an hour. Dr. Voss, if the chamber were to reject your broad inference, what minimum fact do you believe remains impossible to deny? Althea turned toward her. That in the convoy incident, and in the comparison cases, injury alone did not determine relief access. Ven's eyes narrowed slightly. And if that is true? Then medicine was no longer fully medicine. A long pause followed. Then Counselor Diachelon, who had been still as polished metal, asked his question. If we accept even part of your account, what remedy do you seek? Punishment? Compensation? Structural review? There it was, the point where Room's pretended policy might still be tidy. Althea thought of all the things she could ask for and none she could guarantee. So she chose the one the chamber would hate most, because it required public ownership. I seek clarity, she said. Either this council states openly that pain access may be lowered according to status, value, and manageability, or it states openly that medicine may not be used that way. What I will not accept is another layer of procedural language hiding the choice. For the first time all day, Chair Severin looked unsettled. The session recessed to deliberative consultation. In the side chamber, her staff spoke in tight bursts while public feeds speculated wildly on whether Dr. Voss had just embarrassed half the security architecture of the Border World Network. Samir shut the door and leaned both hands on the table. That was good, he said. It was dangerous. Yes. Orense looked less pleased. You pushed the chamber toward a binary they will resist. That was the point, Althea said. Binary positions force institutional loss. Also the point. He started to answer then stopped, because the logic was undeniable. For the next 3 hours the council stalled. Delegates moved in and out of consultation rooms. Media language shifted from technical dispute to doctrinal split. Colonial blocs began asking whether differentiated relief had been used during labor pacifications and resettlement conflicts. Freight Alliance representatives demanded to know which contractors were exposed. When the chamber reconvened, the room looked the same and felt entirely different. Chair Severin spoke more slowly now. He said the chamber was not prepared, on the basis of the present hearing alone, to validate a galaxy-wide accusation of intentional suffering stratification across all mixed border systems. Of course not. Then he went on. He said the chamber also found that the record before it raised serious concern that relief access in certain contested environments may have been conditioned by status and operational category in ways insufficiently separated from medical need. There it was. Not justice. Not yet. But a breach. He continued reading from the ruling draft. Effective immediately, the chamber suspended enforcement weight of existing adaptive analgesic guidance and mixed jurisdiction casualty intake pending independent review. A cross-block inquiry would be opened into relief allocation models used in contested transport and security systems. Perseus Reach's clinical authority in the Conva incident would not be sanctioned on current evidence. Dr. Althea Voss would retain professional standing. No final blame allocation would yet be entered regarding wider structural misuse. It was not a clean victory. The chamber had refused to crown Earth right in a single motion, but it had also refused to bless the system that had tried to swallow her. More importantly, it had dragged the question into formal daylight where future secrecy would cost more. Althea listened to the ruling with her hands flat against the testimony rail. When Severin finished, he added one final line in his own voice rather than from the draft. This council reminds all parties that civilization depends upon difficult distinctions. Althea met his gaze. And it also depends on knowing which distinctions make it less civilized. That line would replay everywhere. The hearing closed. Outside the chamber the feeds were immediate and relentless. Earth Doctor Forces Council Review. Pain Policy under scrutiny after public hearing. Helion denies class-based suffering model. Colonial blocs demand audit of frontier custody medicine. Samir stepped beside her as security began clearing the platform. You understand, he said quietly, that they will call this an overreach for years. Yes. They will say you turned trauma care into ideology. They already did. And some of them will make your life difficult in ways that do not require any public statement. She gave the smallest nod. Also yes. Then I believe congratulations are appropriate. In the corridor beyond the chamber, Joran Tal paused near a security arch while aides swarmed around more important beings. He inclined his head toward Althea, not warmly, but with the respect of someone who had seen a tool used correctly. You made them say it out loud, he said. Part of it. That is enough for one day. He left before she could answer. That evening the council sphere dimmed into its civic night cycle, but the case did not cool. Medical unions across secondary colonies released old complaints about relief denial under custody. Refugee advocates circulated testimony compilations. Freight networks began scrubbing internal compliance language before inquiry teams could demand it. For the first time in years, beings who had long assumed their pain did not count equally began to hear powerful entities arguing over whether that assumption had a legal basis. Earth did not win the galaxy in a day. But humanity had forced a pause. Sometimes that was how larger shifts began. Not with triumph. With interruption. Orensei urged Althea to remain on the sphere for coordinated media handling. She refused all but one recorded statement, and even that she kept short. Earth did not ask for special treatment, she said to the lens. We asked for medicine to remain medicine. It was not a slogan. It was a sentence clean enough to travel. And it did. 2 days later she was cleared to return to Perseus Reach. Before departure, she received a sealed copy of the chamber's interim directive. Samir handed it to her at the transport gate. This is not the end, he said. I know. They may come after the station through funding, licensing, or quiet retaliation. I know. He studied her face. Do you? Yes. That is why I am going back. He nodded. Good. The trip home felt longer, though the route was the same. She spent most of it reviewing follow-up notices from the new inquiry body and requests from clinics, unions, and small aid networks asking for guidance on documenting differential pain control. What began as one station's defense was already becoming language others could use. When Perseus Reach came into view again, its modest geometry against the dark seemed more honest than the council sphere had ever managed. Dock Ring 6 took her in through the same corridor lights, the same intake doors, and the same smell of cleanser and ozone. Chin met her at the threshold with a report slate under one arm and no attempt at ceremony. You were gone 4 days, she said. In that time we had 2 decompression traumas, 1 fungal spill, a broken sterilizer arm, and 12 calls from journalists I did not like. Althea felt something in her chest ease for the first time in weeks. How many of them did you insult? Not enough. Esho appeared behind Chen and clicked his mandibles in greeting. The station remains unclosed. This has disappointed several distant professionals. Pavel were approached more carefully. There are audit teams coming. Good, Althea said. He blinked. Good? Yes. Let them see the ward. Lisa Wren was on records duty when Althea passed that office later. They looked at each other through the glass. Lisa rose halfway, uncertain. Althea did not stop long enough for either confession or punishment. She only said, "Truth from now on." Lisa nodded, stricken and grateful at once. That was all. The ward had new patients by evening. A mining foreman with pressure burns. A child with a crushed wrist from cargo rigging. A Varick dock guard too proud to admit how badly his shoulder hurt. A migrant mother who had delayed care because she feared cost codes more than the fever. Work resumed because work always resumed. During late cycle rounds, Althea entered Recovery Bay 3 and checked the dock guard's shoulder scan. It was a partial tear, with high pain and a good prognosis if he got rest and proper relief. He watched her from the bed, suspicious. "You know I wore a coalition seal when they brought me in." "Yes. And that does not change the dose." "No." He looked away. "That is either noble or foolish." "It is medicine." He said nothing after that. Near midnight, after the monitor settled into a more even rhythm, Althea stepped alone into the intake corridor where the analgesic inventory wall still pulsed with practical problems. Stock was low on 2 lines. One shipment was delayed. This was the kind of trouble she understood. She rested one hand against the console. Persis Reach had not become safe because of the hearing. The blocks still existed. Helion still existed. The border still rewarded systems that treated some pain as affordable. Somewhere in the council sphere, delegates were already drafting smaller words to reduce what had happened into something manageable. But now the burden had shifted. Before, a system could quietly make a low-value body hurt longer and call it procedure. Now, anyone defending that choice had to do so under scrutiny. Clinics, unions, migrants, loaders, detainees, and contract crews had new language for what had long been done to them. It made the larger order hesitate before naming itself. From Recovery Bay 2 came the low murmur of a nurse reassuring a frightened patient that the next dose was due soon. From Docking Ring 6 came a distant clamp noise that meant another ship had arrived with problems nobody had solved in time. Althea straightened, opened the incoming manifest, and read it in one steady breath. It was a mixed crew with hull breach survivors and possible contamination. 3 were critical. 2 were security officers. 5 were civilian labor. 1 was an undocumented miner. The usual frontier work. She keyed the station-wide alert. "Trauma intake in 4 minutes," she said into the channel. "All teams to receiving. Same rules as always. Treat the injury first." Lights rose. Footsteps answered. The station came awake around her. And somewhere far beyond the station walls, across trade lanes and chamber towers and the careful language of powerful people, the galaxy would go on deciding what humanity was. This time, at least, it would have to do so with one problem it had not had before. Too many people had heard the old logic spoken clearly. Too many people now knew what it sounded like. Althea did not stand there thinking about victory. There was another ship coming in, and somebody on it was already hurting. That was enough to bring her forward. She turned back to the corridor, checked the nearest cart, and headed for receiving as the first dock alarm sounded. And that was enough. Some stories do not end with victory. They end with someone choosing, once again, to do the right thing when it still costs something. If this story stayed with you, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who loves science fiction too. If humanity's fight to stay human in a wider galaxy is the kind of story you enjoy, stay with us for the next one.